The message of To the Moon is that, at times, themes don't matter, that listening to falsehoods and playing pretend can still be worth it for the joy it gives you, even if there isn't a clear takeaway outside of that. Meaning can be derived from basically all media, but that does not mean it should be the main priority for its audience or creator. At times, it's better to live in the present and just not think about it. To sit back and enjoy the ride, and see what the story throws at you. As one of many who grew up during the 2000s, the specific memory of staying up past curfew and turning on the TV to catch Adult Swim in secret holds a truly special place in my heart. The oftentimes creepy animations and mature subject matter often went over my head, but for most of the shows and creators of that period, age came with wisdom, and I eventually managed to get it as I got older. Even among those shows, Xavier Renegade Angel holds the distinction of being extremely obscure, both not too well known on the one hand and thematically indecipherable on the other. While many themes are present within each episode, and some genuinely great work has been done analyzing the series already, I couldn't find any cohesive breakdowns of what exactly collectively the series is managing to say. So, as a fan of media analysis who enjoys a good challenge, consider this that, my attempt to fill that void. At the very least, I want closure so this series can get off my mind. Couple of things to say first though. As per usual, spoilers, but I cannot actually recommend checking out the series in good faith. While a lot of the humor and jokes per second are extremely effective, the series frequently touches on extremely controversial and or problematic subject matter, basically throughout. If you have any boundaries or topics that you consider off limits for the sake of humor, then this show probably isn't for you. Literally everything offensive that can happen at some point manages to, whether it involves children, animals, blackface, literally everything. Xavier does not care, it will joke about it, and if that is something you are not okay with, just be warned up front. I cannot recommend watching the show with that in mind. Similarly, gross-out humor is extremely frequent, to the point of genuine discomfort at times. I myself don't find all the jokes funny enough to be worth it, and I am a lot more comfortable with this style of humor than most people, so to reiterate, be very careful if you're choosing to check it out. After that, it should also be said that this is a quote-to-quote serious analysis of a very non-serious show. It isn't meant to be taken too seriously, and I would argue that the show literally says as much. The showmakers have spoken about Xavier being an unreliable narrator, and it is a fourth-wall-breaking comedy at the end of the day, so it shouldn't be taken too seriously just on principle. I have my own reasons for doing so anyway, but just to be clear, I do get it. If that bothers you, be warned, I am self-aware. Just want to get all that out up front. Finally, while I will be analysing the main narrative strokes, and specifically Xavier's arc as a character, and the symbolic messaging around that, I will not be analysing the many specific themes approached within each individual episode. The wonderful video by Malmrose Projects, I think I'm pronouncing that right, has already done that type of analysis with a great degree of depth, and I do highly recommend it, so please check that out if you find this video in any way lacking or just genuinely love Xavier. While this video is very much a standalone, I will likely be referencing their work at least a couple of times, and occasionally treading on the same territory. All that said, spoiler warning, over. Beginning in a desert, our hero Xavier is center stage. Brown fur, white loincloth, backwards legs. He doesn't quite look human, yet is still clearly adjacent.
What doth life? Are we just fleshy blips in some meaningless stew of cosmic oblivion? Or is it vice versa? Is our every trollop through fate's garden infused with a mystic?
Are the first lines spoken, conveyed by an inner monologue. He's interrupted by a thrown glass. These lines quickly communicate three important things about Xavier. 1, that he desires knowledge about what the point of life is. 2, that he is pretentious enough to use words like doth unironically. And 3rd, that he is failing at basic grammar. It should be mentioned that he doesn't say this to anyone. His decision to use more pompous and pretentious language when thinking to himself implies that it isn't just him showing off or putting on a front. These are his genuine thoughts and feelings. He is interrupted by a thrown bottle, with multiple men telling him to cease that inner yapping. The implication of them knowing that he was monologuing within his head feels notable. With the background desert disappearing behind him, replaced by the street of a small town, the implications are also somewhat interesting. Either he is teleported in some way, or the desert was all in his head. Xavier then announces himself.
Please, I'm just a simple seeker on a spirit quest to doth life?
We don't cotton to freaks here in Burberry, and we don't hate freaks would open unquenchable cans of philosophical thirst worms.
Those 5 words, "we don't cotton to freaks," are extremely common throughout the show. While the general sentiment is somewhat obvious, the use of the word cotton itself is interesting. According to Google, to take a cotton to something means to take a liking to it, or to get along with it. I myself wasn't aware of this going into the show, however, and suspect many others might also not be. Cotton, the fabric, is strongly associated with the Civil War South, which in turn is associated with bigotry, which in turn is associated with intolerance towards others. So given that they are expressing disdain for Xavier, a stranger, the symbolic word choice feels pertinent. These associations are more felt than outright thought about, but they do paint a very specific vibe. The word cotton can also be interpreted as a variation of caught on, as in to understand, to finally get something. I legitimately wasn't sure if that was what they were saying the first time I heard it. So in a way, it's them, their townspeople, effectively saying, we don't get to not hate you yet. They haven't caught on to accepting freaks. It's a bit of a stretch, maybe, but the idea is the same. They don't accept Xavier due to low intellect and just general bigotry. This type of thing comes up a lot throughout the series, so it feels worth mentioning all this now. The guy then spits on Xavier, and Xavier then licks it up. While an example of the gross-out humor frequent throughout the series, it also paints Xavier as legitimately a weirdo beyond just the appearance. Non-bigoted reasons exist for them to feel uncomfortable around him. Xavier's instrument, the shakushuri, was broken by the thrown object.
Don't hate freaks would open unquenchable cans of philosophical thirst worms.
You're gonna regret that. You've shattered my shakushuri.
I hope y'all can play it 3 feet up your ass.
Dunno, but I'd sure like to try.
The use of the word y'all to refer to a single person again implies stupidity on the bigot's end, reinforcing the idea that they are in fact lacking intelligence.
Dunno, but I'd sure like to try.
Is Xavier's response. Another example of Xavier trying to be clever but maybe not succeeding. To quote Will Smith,
He a little confused, but he got the spirit.
So by this point we have finished the first minute of the show. From it we can gather a few things. Xavier wants to find the meaning of life. Some of the stuff we see is likely all in his head. He isn't all that smart, same goes for the bigots who fail to accept him. He is a bit pretentious, but very likely sincere about it. Extending the sequence by another minute, we then see Xavier get his ass kicked, and that he is somewhat cowardly and non-confrontational based on his body language. He may try to act tough at times, but he doesn't really defend himself when attacked, instead just taking it. He gets beaten up because he looks and acts different and doesn't defend himself. It comes across more as him being scared, rather than him having any principled stance on pacifism. He is a victim who's likely been through this before. These are the first few minutes of the show, our opening introduction to Xavier as a character, and they paint a very detailed first image. We're off to a good start. Before breaking down the rest of the episode, and then the whole series, let's take some time to go ahead and discuss his appearance. Covered in fur, with 6 nipples where a six-pack would be, a beak for a nose, blonde hair, and both a blue and brown eye, a snake replacing his left hand, and legs bent backwards, though feet noticeably not so. As mentioned by Malmrose in their video, Xavier is meant as a satire of New Age spirituality, and parts of his appearance reflect that. What appears to be a black studded pauldron sits on his right shoulder, a crystal necklace rests at his neck, and a loincloth sneaker combo make up the rest of his outfit. The brightly colored nose and blonde hair combo invoke the surfer dude archetype, which is often associated with New Age and hippie culture. The abundance of animalistic qualities, meanwhile, from the snake hand to the fur, the multiple nipples, the almost insect-like shape of his legs, and his beak, all reinforce a significant nature association. Given the prominence of nature within many New Age spiritual frameworks, the same association is somewhat built into his image. His use of a loincloth invokes a mixture of barbarian, Tarzan, and caveman imagery, all of which are to some extent associated with nature, and, unfortunately, oftentimes associated with lower intelligence as well. I dislike bringing this up, as similar clothing is also associated with indigenous communities oftentimes, but it is hard to ignore the intelligence symbolism given Xavier's general character. Him being stupid is a very recurring point throughout the series. The indigenous association also reinforces the cultural appropriation critique often applied to New Age spirituality, that they don't really understand the things they claim to believe in. The pauldron in particular, with seemingly studded leather as the material choice, reinforces a lot of associations. For us fantasy nerds out there, while it does add protection as armor, it covers only a tiny area, meaning its usefulness is somewhat negligible. Later on in the series, it is revealed that the pauldron is actually a beetle, which reinforces the nature association. The crystal necklace feels somewhat straightforward to connect with stereotypical spirituality, and so doesn't warrant too much discussion, while the sneakers demonstrate a break from the rest of his outfit. Given the obvious utility of shoes and the very much modern aesthetic of them, it kinda contrasts the more natural aesthetic of everything else he's wearing. If they are worn so he is comfortable traveling, it could be emblematic of some potential hypocrisy, with using modern conveniences while otherwise rejecting the modern world spiritually. Given that the common criticism of New Age spirituality being appropriative implies that it doesn't understand or respect the cultures it's taking the ideas from, the presence of modern sneakers directly contrasting the rest of his outfit may be a visual way to embody that idea. The backwards legs and their symbolism Melrose Project's already covered, so to conclude the visual breakdown, I will end on 2 points. First, that Xavier being mostly naked justifies other people being somewhat uncomfortable with him on a baseline level without bigotry as a factor. Not everyone who avoids him, again, is bigoted. And 2, his decision to not wear clothes anyway, given that fact, can be read as either a principled decision based on some sort of spiritual belief, or as him being socially inept and not realizing that near nudity is a social taboo that he is breaking. To an extent, their discomfort is on him. On to the show. Following Xavier's getting beaten up by the bigots, he goes to a computer and asks the question of what doth life, which in turn results in the computer having what appears to be an existential crisis, beginning to glitch in the process. A lady shows up, politely apologizing for the computer being on the fritz, which Xavier then interprets as extreme kindness on her end, the first of many misunderstandings in the series. He then assumes she will want to hear his life story, which could be some form of misunderstanding, but also implies a degree of ego on his end. Several flashbacks are shown. A silvery man is shown Moses-style sending Xavier in a basket down a river. Xavier is then repeatedly shown as growing up rejected and bullied throughout his childhood, with the insult Chomsky honk being given special status as the uniquely worst insult. He is shown to have at some point developed an interest in philosophy, which then caused him to accidentally set his house on fire without realizing it, and to have accidentally killed his dad in the process. From there, he decided to set out to find his father's killer, and to understand his own origins. Notably, this is a very different set of motivations than discovering what doth life. The girl asks if he uses his powers to save people, to which he then dismisses having powers, saying that his wisdom instead is a gift. She begins to walk away, and he then rushes to push her over, worried that a car that was nowhere near her might actually be a threat. He then claims that she owes him her life for having done so. Given yet another flashback from his past self, learning future sight from the shaman, his past self sees his present-day self in the past self's future. Present-day Xavier then calls his past self a Chomsky honk, using the worst possible insult in his own words to refer to himself. He might not hold his past self in very high esteem. The lines are then spoken.
Look at the two of us. We could be like Beauty and the Beast. What do you say? Will you be my beast?
Again, it's a joke from the writers, but one that reflects ego and low intellect on Xavier's end. He thinks of himself as the beauty. Importantly though, it's him trying his hand at a relationship with a near-complete stranger after the absolute bare minimum of kindness shown his way. There's a well-known cliché of characters who act full of themselves being deeply insecure, as well as one of lone outcasts who are shunned by society, being desperate for connection. Both of these may very well apply to Xavier. The girl then leaves, he stares and watches her shower through her window, and then he notices that a computer virus is beginning to spread and affect the real world. Stealing the AIDS virus from the government as a possible cure for the computer virus, Xavier gets stopped by the bigots from before, who assume he had something to do with their current situation. It's notable that Xavier didn't hesitate to get involved and try to save the day. He does genuinely want to help people on some level. That or he wants credit for it, but either way he immediately gets to work. Xavier ultimately solves the crisis using an improvised shakashuri, demonstrating the first notable example of him magically affecting the world around him. The shakashuri was made by tearing off the arm of the nice girl, and by tearing the spine out of her dog, killing it. Xavier saves the town, and then asks a new question of the computer. The computer glitches again, seemingly deleting all of reality except for Xavier. He gives a breakup monologue right afterwards, which implies the reality destruction was intentional and not just him making the same mistake a second time. His true love is rambling on, he says, and he then eats her entire dimension. The episode ends with Xavier back in the desert, getting into a car with a stranger who, after showing his genitalia to Xavier, then seemingly has his head explode. I'll be showing a little character sheet at this point, just to try and keep track of everything. Xavier destroying an entire reality is obviously what one might call bad, but it does highlight that whatever potential relationship he can have with the girl, his friendship with her is less important to him than rambling on in pursuit of answers. He may get attached to people very quickly, but his priorities lie elsewhere. Which brings us to episode 2. Upon starting the episode, a mosquito is found dying, which Xavier then saves by doing CPR. In return, the mosquito then protects Xavier by fighting off a group of bigots who attack him, though in return it also plants a series of eggs in his brain, apologizing for doing so as it dies. Xavier then tries and fails to revive the mosquito before speaking the following lines.
To be a hero, you have to go looking for trouble. Wherever there is suffering, I was there. Wherever there is injustice, I was there. And wherever there is crying, I'm right here.
Throughout the statement, his temporal reference, I guess, is a bit off linguistically. He's using tense bad, more stupid proof, English not good, grammar bad, that kind of thing. This mainly just reinforces the basic idea that Xavier isn't necessarily the smartest, given that he's not using proper grammar and such. Aside from that, though, the implication is that bad things happen around him always, with him presumably as the cause, the joke being that he doesn't seem to realize that he's responsible for the bad things that he encounters. The reason he doesn't notice a pattern could be intelligence-related, but there are other reasons we'll get to later. The serious implications of that, however, regardless, would actually be fairly depressing if he has any sense of empathy, watching the people around him suffer and never fully understanding why. If he ever does realize his own responsibility for causing them problems, the guilt could be extremely painful. Importantly, also, it seems to show Xavier thinking of himself as a hero who helps those in need. Whether it's care for others, something he aspires to be for himself, or something he just wants praise and attention for, it still hasn't been made clear. A crying teenager named Percy was being bullied by a Mexican gang, so Xavier performs as the school mascot in his stead. Impressed by his performance, the gang accepts him as a member, and Xavier then convinces them to turn their lives around and pursue their passions as non-criminals. The drug lord Shiny, who matches the appearance of Xavier's original father in the first episode, confronts the gang for not having the drugs he was promised. He states the lines,
Give me back my son. Wait, sorry, I need drugs.
during the eventual conflict, effectively confirming it is indeed Xavier's father from the flashback. The mosquito's children hatch from Xavier's head and then defeat Shiny, causing him to fall into lava. The lava is then used to construct a building, which in turn attains sentience and kills the real Percy, the teenager from earlier, the mosquito's children, and several civilians as the episode ends. Xavier being accepted when everyone was under the impression he was actually a costumed Percy implies that he could make friends on some level if people don't worry about his appearance. Unlike the common trope of the series, that almost everyone has their lives worsened because of Xavier being there, the gang is never killed on screen, and all evidence points towards their lives genuinely being made for the better thanks to Xavier's involvement. Furthermore, the entire mosquito plotline shows that Xavier does occasionally do genuine good by other creatures, who sometimes kindly try to return the favor. He does have potential to actually achieve friendship and happiness, and he can play hero successfully every now and then. The Shiny father is basically never explored again any time in the series, but it can be inferred that he does actually care about finding his son since he literally said as much. The Moses parallel in the first episode and the Mosquito storyline and its parallels to it imply that he might have had some greater reason for giving up Xavier while not really wanting to. The meaning and symbolism of this, again, is never actually explored in depth, but regardless, they could have been able to form a genuine relationship if things were different, another example of Xavier having potential for friendship and actual connection. Which brings us to episode 3. The sudden transition from desert to society, with society audio playing prior to the actual visuals changing, feels a little odd and worth mentioning. Xavier encounters a trio of teenagers, a disabled one and 2 friends of theirs. He mistakenly assumes that the 2 friends are actually bullies and ends up offending them to the point of getting himself beaten up. The disabled kid kindly sees fit to trust Xavier right afterwards, since at least his heart was in the right place, with Xavier shortly after discovering the secret of the disabled kid being a scientific genius. The kid's father, a faith healer, is unknowingly a fraud, with the disabled genius literally pulling the strings to make the healing work. Revealing his lab to Xavier, the disabled genius creates life shortly afterwards. Xavier seemingly gets jealous, declares the child an enemy for being full of hubris, and then shows his faith healer dad the son's secret. Xavier then goes to the disabled kid to gloat after the fact. The father, his faith having been destroyed, attempts self-immolation within the lab, becoming a living explosion after combining with the son's work. The child ultimately kills him after Xavier drags him towards the lake, saying that the military can't be allowed such a powerful weapon. The explosion kills many people along the way due to Xavier not knowing the actual way to the lake, and his solution of drowning the explosion ultimately fails, with the child saving the day from a situation Xavier caused. Unlike the previous episode, the tragedy and suffering are in this case entirely caused by Xavier. His boldly making assumptions combined with his stupidity. Similarly, while it's obvious that Xavier was genuinely jealous of the genius kid, it isn't entirely clear what Xavier's mindset was with telling his dad. While it might be true that Xavier genuinely thought the kid was boasting and gloating, in which case telling the dad was a stupid but well-intended attempt to bring the genius kid down a peg, the alternative is that it was entirely Xavier being petty and jealous, with him making up a justification in the moment to lash out at the kid who hurt his feelings, because of his sense of inferiority. Xavier himself being full of hubris, both in his assumptions about the child and his friends, as well as in the lake solution with the father explosion, directly leads to the suffering of the people around him. The child, who makes the mistake of trusting Xavier, ultimately ends up enabling the entire chain of events to take place. Notably, he was kind to Xavier even after the first encounter, showing another example of Xavier actually having the potential to make friends. Just as the father's faith was misplaced, so was the genius child's trust of Xavier and Xavier's faith in himself. This also represents the first disaster in the show that Xavier doesn't end up resolving, with the genius child instead acting as the actual hero. Finally, at the very end of the episode, there's a very interesting line said by Xavier.
Always tough to kill your dad, but you made the right choice, kid. I guess your brain isn't as dumb as your legs. Just don't go entering your...
While obviously a joke, the irony of the statement considering Xavier's backstory is notable. It isn't said with any trace of guilt, but it is spoken knowingly, so maybe deep down on some level he does actually realize, even if he isn't consciously aware of it. Episode 4, Xavier is walking and monologuing in a desert before face-planting into a road sign because he was just oblivious as to it being there. Speaking with his snake hand, now revealed to be a fully sentient character, Xavier walks off screen and the screen cuts to a mother in a playground, taking one of her 8 babies up a slide so that they can ride down it with her one by one. Xavier then walks into frame, presumably after a bit of journeying from the desert. Seeing the babies, and assuming that they were abandoned by their parents, he has a flashback of his own father abandoning him. Immediately after the flashback, Xavier says the following.
If that kind of thing had actually happened to me, I don't know what I'd do. I'd save these poor kids, is what.
The lines imply that the events of the flashback didn't actually happen, and so it was likely just his imagination running wild. Even if the events didn't actually take place, it does still depict the way Xavier thinks of his father in terms of his general characterization. This also represents the second time Xavier being abandoned as a kid has come up, and so those two details might come back later. Xavier decides to adopt the abandoned children as his own. The episode follows the mother's descent into madness over the loss she has suffered, her attempts to find and rescue them, Xavier's oblivious attempts to rescue her kids while caring for his new adopted family, and Snakehand eating most of the babies while manipulating Xavier into allowing it. When the police and the mother eventually catch Xavier at the end, he deludes himself into thinking he's being framed for the kidnapping, and allows Snakehand to remove the evidence, so that an innocent Xavier can't be taken to jail. While the act can be argued as Xavier being sincerely foolish again, prioritizing an innocent person going to jail over multiple babies getting eaten, it can also be read as him being cowardly, wanting to defend his own well-being over that of multiple infants. So he might be stupid, or he might be selfish, but it's unclear which. Notably, in neither case is he acknowledging any responsibility for the situation, and he never realizes that he did indeed steal the children from the mom. The basic premise of Xavier's stupidity and of his attempts at heroism causing mass suffering are both reinforced with this episode, with a possible interpretation of Xavier being selfish and cowardly on top of it. On to episode 5. Visiting a pet store that is going out of business, Xavier vows to help. He imagines a number of customers, including a pair that robbed the store, each resembling a hologram in Star Wars fashion. Having just lost the last of his income, the shop owner then cries in response, saying,
That was the last of my cash and Magoo. I can't even imagine how my family will suffer and starve.
I can help you visualize that too.
As Xavier waves his hands across the screen, a rich man and rich child appear at the doorway, seemingly as a result of Xavier. His visualizing can seemingly create real people as well, not just the blue holograms. He can reshape the world around him with his mind. The pet shop owner gets paid an exorbitant sum for Xavier as a pet, and no attention is given to him later on in the episode, meaning he might have actually achieved a happy ending thanks to Xavier. Again, it just goes to show he doesn't always fail at helping people. As a pet of the rich kid, Xavier is mistreated temporarily before eventually causing the rich kid to experience true suffering for the sake of character growth. Xavier refers to the rich kid as his student throughout this period. The rich kid, meanwhile, both doesn't seem to hold any grudge against Xavier and also seems to genuinely learn to respect him after his character growth. Attempting to fix the morality of the rich father, Xavier injects him with Native American blood. This results in the man exploiting his Native American blood for the sake of profit, with hijinks ensuing. At the end of this, an army of Native American blood golems and Arab American cowboy blood golems are locked in combat, killing everyone in the town. The rich kid, watching the bloodshed, turns to his spiritual master Xavier for guidance, to which Xavier says, "You can take it from here, kid," and then runs off, leaving the rich kid to somehow handle it all on his own. Xavier does successfully improve life for the pet shop owner, and depending on whether the rich kid survives, he has become a better person, who is also set to inherit massive amounts of wealth and the potential to genuinely make the world a better place. However, Xavier directly led to the father's misdeeds and the death of countless people, possibly including the rich kid himself. Xavier running away again can be read as stupidity, with him genuinely thinking the rich kid has the situation covered, but it can also be read in two distinct other ways. First, as another case of cowardice, heavily implied by Xavier literally running away from the conflict and bloodshed. And lastly, as a form of negligence, same as in the first episode. If Xavier's desire to ramble took precedence over an entire reality existing, in which a love interest of his actually survived, then him abandoning his apprentice, who did genuinely seem to respect him, feels fairly in character. Every episode at this point has featured Xavier attempting heroism. He has had multiple relationships that resemble actual friendships, all of which he has ditched. Seeking the truth and spirit questing have yet to actually happen on screen. His motivations are suspect, but he does have the potential to do good things, even though he mostly causes harm. Episode 6 is the Sand Madness episode. The idea of hallucinations is introduced immediately, so the canonicity of this episode is immediately suspect. However, it is still informative as to the mindset of Xavier and how he sees things. Xavier being near starvation due to his rambling through the desert, after what might have been weeks without food or water, puts forward the idea that his rambling journey might actually be making him miserable. Traveling through a desert environment and living life as a homeless wanderer both aren't exactly comfortable for most people. Regardless of whatever spiritual merit he might find in doing so, the journey itself isn't pleasant. Finding a diner, he encounters a pair of gay men who also happen to be bigots, who beat up Xavier shortly upon meeting him. Again, his appearance causes him to suffer, even though his actions don't exactly help. Seeing a cave drawing of what appears to be himself, Xavier travels back in time to investigate the hint as to his origins. Encountering a caveman who is abusing his cavewoman wife, Xavier successfully convinces him to stop being an abuser, though the caveman's last scene might complicate that fact. His computer tells Xavier that he was the one who drew the cave painting, to which Xavier responds,
Xavier, my data show that you did the drawing yourself.
You figured that out right after numb-nutted Neanderballs. Now get me back home.
The caveman then throws down the stone tablet Xavier gave him to write his feelings onto, before grabbing the wife and running off screen. Caveman throwing down the tablet may imply that he is offended by Xavier's words, which gives him a possible motivation to spite Xavier in his lessons about being non-abusive. If so, Xavier undid his own heroism by accident. Xavier temporarily gets to experience another world through the cave woman's tattooed back. In this place, it is revealed that Xavier's origin might be from a one-night stand between his mother and an entire zoo, to which Xavier is horrified to find out. Due to the entire episode being questionably canon, all thanks to Sand Madness, it can be debated whether this is just Xavier's inner fears manifesting or an actual hint to his real origins. Either way, his shame and horror at the zoo scene show that he is deeply insecure about it. Later characterization of the mother makes the zoo scene seem plausible. Given that his appearance has been animalistic since the very beginning, and given his long history of not being accepted by others based on appearance, deep-seated insecurity feels realistic. Based on the beginning of this episode, the rambling on in pursuit of answers is only furthering his misery, as he isn't necessarily enjoying the act of wandering through the desert. Aside from the cave people, heroism isn't present in this episode, and even that, as always, he manages to fail through his own incompetence. As of episode 7, Xavier is rambling through the desert again, and wondering how much longer it must continue before a figure descends from the sky announcing a celebration ceremony for Xavier, being the world's greatest guardian angel.
Here's the orphan whose life you saved! Oh, well, this is the priest you rescued!
That's the wino who mouthed my bottom.
The rest of the crowd then chimes in.
We're all dead.
You haven't saved any of us.
The priest's remark feels somewhat notable due to the term wino being one that I didn't understand going into it. Assuming the term rhino was intended, referencing his animalistic appearance, or why no, referencing his status as a philosophy buff, the expression still made sense while feeling quirky for the sake of the joke. The actual term, wino, refers to an alcoholic, implying that the priest considered Xavier a drunkard. Shortly after, it is then revealed that the whole sequence was just Xavier dreaming. Perhaps his inner guilt over his failures as a hero is manifesting, and deep down he realizes that he has made their lives worse. Some actual regret may exist deep down. While showering shortly afterwards, Xavier seemingly enjoys himself to the idea of helping people. Whatever his motivation is for why he wants to, he does clearly want to. Xavier's fetishization of helping people, combined with his insecurities about being a failed hero, paint a messy picture in conjunction with his previous actions, the rejection of heroism and friendship in the first episode, and his constant pursuit of rambling as a primary motivation. He doesn't enjoy rambling, yet gives up happiness and stability for it. His rambling makes the world a worse place, and on some level he realizes that. He still seeks answers as to his origin, but clearly deep down fears what he might find out, and at no point throughout the series has he actually sought out wisdom for its own sake. He hasn't tried to learn, only to teach. Episode 8 begins on the anniversary of his father's death. Pugler, the punk rock juggler, is shown messing with fire for the entertainment of his audience, to which Xavier, traumatized by his father's death, immediately calls it out as reckless. He ends up joining Pugler at Squatopia, a place where anarchy reigns supreme. There, he has his necklace stolen, his only remaining memento of his father now being lost. Questing to get the necklace back, Xavier joins a punk-seeking structure, a runaway slave still alive from the Civil War, and the worst example of gross-out humor yet, Xavier's son. Eventually they retrieve the necklace, but Xavier gives it up to his son, who I will not describe, who then dies as the episode ends. The son burns everyone, which Xavier acknowledges, after also acknowledging that he himself is a bad dad. The necklace is shown earlier in the episode as being created from Xavier's father urinating in a toilet.
What's that necklace, Daddy? It represents my feelings for you.
So, symbolically, both Xavier and his father are bad parents whose children end up burning everything down. No evidence is given of this being a dream episode, but the similarities between Xavier, his son, and his dad could nonetheless be symbolic of him starting to realize the truth about his father's killer, or at the very least coming to terms with it on some level, if the episode is not to be taken literally. Xavier acknowledges himself as a bad father in the same episode where his relationship to his father is given a large degree of emphasis. The necklace made from urine isn't exactly a symbol of love or adoration. Combined with the abandonment flashback from earlier in the series, Xavier's father doesn't seem to care for him, indicating a bad home life for Xavier growing up. He wasn't just suffering at school, but at home as well. And just like Xavier himself, his son causes a fire that kills people. Nothing more needs to be said on that front.
No! Fire should be shot in the back of the head for killing my parents. I vow to never rest until I've found my father's slayer.
What about your mother?
She knows what she's done.
The joke of Mother knows what she's done feels notable also, having happened twice throughout the episode. No clear explanation is given, but one solution might be the zoo hallucination from episode 6. Xavier may resent her for her role in his potential origins. The exact aftermath of the house fire, however, hasn't been portrayed yet, so maybe something else was done to ruin their relationship. At the very least, the life of Xavier is revealed as worse than otherwise thought, not just experiencing bigotry, but a toxic home life as well. He is made just a bit more sympathetic and tragic as a consequence of that fact. Episode 9 starts with Xavier turning a desert into an ocean, an example of his almost omnipotent ability to affect the world around him. A first for the series, we are given a young British girl as a narrator. Xavier reaches a fork in the road and chooses the left path, the path of the mind. Symbolically, the path is left and ergo not the right path for him to be choosing. He comes across a town that has been butchered for unknown reasons, with a near-death corpse still taking time to insult him before losing its eye. The bodies look burnt, and are being eaten by what appear to be vultures. Finding a distressed ape within a bedroom alongside a bloody corpse, Xavier begins experiencing the corpse's memories through his computer. A preacher was romantically interested in the ape, and asked a fortune teller to show him what might happen if he pursued the relationship. The future vision given by the fortune teller depicts him killing himself out of guilt afterwards, and the ape taking his place as a televangelist, eventually becoming beloved worldwide as a genuine messiah figure. The priest leaves the fortune teller happy at the news, only for the fortune teller to reveal later that the entire thing was a lie, just telling the priest what he wanted to hear. Xavier develops a romantic interest in a woman, June, present within the flashbacks, and withdraws her from them, again showing his supernatural abilities. The computer then tells him,
Xavier, I've analyzed the brain juice, the thoughts. They're coming from within your head. Get out of your head! Get out of your head!
Xavier comes to at the fork in the road, showing that the entire previous sequence was all in his head, and he then goes right. Before moving on, let's deep dive into this hallucination real quick. The priest did kill himself, as predicted by the events of the fortune teller, but none of his chain of events explain the events in the town, the variety of seemingly burnt bodies with a single survivor, who notably both isn't burnt and also is being consumed by vultures. The priest himself also isn't burnt, implying some sort of connection between him and the bigot being eaten. Meanwhile, the ape being stressed and the non-decomposed state of the priest imply that he only died sometime shortly before Xavier arrives on scene. With the understanding that the events of the mind path are not real and so do not need to make sense, they still do reflect the psychology of Xavier and the concepts and ideas he is repressing and feeling and thinking about on some level. The priest sought out wisdom, was told what he wanted to hear, acted upon it, and then lost his life. Given that Xavier's spirit quest has cost countless people their lives, and that he does act as a giver of wisdom, this may imply that he feels somewhat guilty and is deep down self-aware of the consequences of his actions. The priest being misled implies that Xavier might have been as well at some point, though this interpretation is complicated also. Both Xavier and the priest do preach their beliefs and their wisdom to the world at large, so there is somewhat of a comparison to be made there. Xavier having genuine powers over the world around him implies he does actually have a deeper understanding of it than anyone else. That the teachings of the shaman have been shown to work implies that he is knowledgeable in some way. Xavier's frequent misunderstandings, however, do reinforce the idea of someone lacking self-awareness and wisdom, but not necessarily that he has been tricked or swindled in some way. Beyond that, the bodies of the townspeople are burnt in the same way that Xavier's father was. Vultures eating a person invokes the myth of Prometheus, a giver of knowledge who was condemned for doing so. The ape-human relationship may also reflect the inner fears about his origin discussed in episode 6. All in all, both the idea that Xavier is afraid of learning the truth he is seeking, and the separate idea that his search for the truth may have caused harm to countless people, feel like the primary messages given by the Mind Path sequence. Before moving on, the narrator gives us a small monologue.
And that's when he realized that to stand and consider all possibilities is to drown in a tunneling sea of infinite potentiality. So he changed his mind and took the path on the right. His right. If you are facing him, it's your left.
To ponder is a waste of time. There are too many things to consider. He can't just ponder as it leads him nowhere. Xavier realizes that he shouldn't overthink it and should just follow his heart instead, and then we see the consequences of him doing so. He encounters a small crowd of people. We see the farmer, Shiny, Mosquito Man, the cake shop lady from the episode with the living explosion, the slave, Pugler, a pixelated man from the first episode, the caveman, the blonde octomom, the rich dad, the fortune teller, who noticeably has a crystal ball over her face, the rich kid apprentice he abandoned, and in the front row, the narrator girl and June, his love interest for this episode. The crowd, all the people he's met along the way, surround him and hug him to triumphant music, while in the background we hear.
Push! Honey, push! It's some kind of monster!
Just 2 more Xaviers left. Out there, out somewhere, somewhere.
Dissecting this segment first, not everyone is a close friend of Xavier, not everyone is someone important to their episode's plot, and not everyone is someone he actually tried to help. Xavier allows himself to receive affection only to have that trust betrayed. His family views him a monster, as does everyone else. Following his heart leads to his death because of him trusting other people, and he knows in his heart that he is viewed as a monster. He wants affection as a hero. Most of those around him he has killed. The camera cuts to 2 separate Xaviers walking towards one another within a large desert. The camera cuts to a gravestone titled The World, which has a hand doing a peace sign emerge from it. The hand resembles Xavier's. The screen cuts to the stressed gorilla in a noticeably different room now than before, where he then removes his face to reveal himself a robot, piloted by another monkey, who then draws a crucifix on his chest. Given that the mind path was all in Xavier's head, it doesn't feel unreasonable to assume the same about the heart path. The symbolism of the last few scenes, only 2 Xaviers remaining alive, the possible 3rd buried in the world grave, and the significance of the robot ape and ape pilot, as well as the robot ape environment change, I don't actually know with confidence, and due to the canonicity aspect of it being in his head, the implications are further unclear. Basically, I'm not 100% sure how to interpret all of this, even now after having seen the series a dozen times. Similarly, Xavier being killed off by the crowd doesn't clearly seem to make sense, even with it happening within his own head, though perhaps him being heartbroken and spiritually killed on the heart path does actually make sense. The possible existence of multiple Xaviers is the only part of this ending sequence that feels like it might be worth taking literally, and directly ties into the next episode. The rest of it I may return to later, as the rest of the show provides more context. The last thing I will say on this episode in particular is that both paths ultimately lead to suffering or stagnation for Xavier. The best decision he could possibly have made would be to not follow either. And so we have reached episode 10, the last episode of the first season. It begins with a speech from Xavier.
Self, I don't buy it. And you say to me, self. I say, yeah, who's? Yeah, self. I got bigger fish to fry. The 6-ton guppy in the room.
With this statement, Xavier is quite literally saying that himself is less important than finding his father's killer. This could be referring to his search being more important than his own well-being, but it could also be more psychological, his self-awareness and finding himself being less important to him. A giant cloud version of Xavier's dad appears, telling Xavier that it was indeed him that killed his father. Arson was actually our son. Xavier lands on the ground, dropped by the Cloudfather, and separates into 2 individuals, one red and one blue. So, depending on how literally the ending from episode 9 is taken, there may be up to 4 Xaviers moving around now. Xavier attempts to kill himself only to be interrupted by 2 men. While not justified in their aggression towards Xavier, they also never announce themselves as being upset by his appearance like the other bigots in the show. They can be read as responding to Xavier's quote-to-quote disrespect instead, highlighting how he is his own worst enemy by coming across badly through his own incompetence. Slicing the hair off Xavier's wrist, a set of tattooed numbers are shown, which, given their real-world parallel, understandably lead the men harassing Xavier to feel horrified at their actions and to run away. The origin of said tattoos on Xavier's body is never stated and never comes up again in the series. Xavier interprets the numbers as a phone number, and then leaves to go to a phone booth, where he ends up calling a cloned version of himself. It isn't clearly stated which clone of Xavier this is, but the 2 immediately end up in a fight. Both can't stand one another, insulting one another until eventually culminating in the famous Shakashuri blowdown, an iconic fan-favorite scene. The fact that Xavier immediately can't stand someone just like him, as an expression of his self-hatred, insecurity, guilt over his father's death, his hubris, his lifetime of experiencing bigotry, and whatever he's internalized from it, it isn't surprising. He was established a long time ago as the type to get jealous and defensive. He genuinely hates himself. In their conversation, they refer to the other's presence as a coping trope.
Well, you sound like some total chode's inability to confront the reality of his past actions. Oh yeah? I don't polycotton to coping tropes, even my own. Listen, this psyche is not big enough for two metaphysical seekers. You sound like the physical manifestation of some loser's inner demons. You're the sad figment of my twisted psyche's tragic dividend.
The other episodes, the implication is that this specific episode might also just be in Xavier's head. Alternatively, however, Xavier manipulating the world around him magically is also a recurring plot point. His inner psyche literally manifesting before him isn't fully out of left field. The battle itself isn't too interesting early on, with both Xaviers taking turns one-upping each other before psychedelic visuals take over. At one point within the battle, the two Xaviers are shown, with one attempting to grab the other's hand. Given the handshake is widely considered a diplomatic gesture, the reveal feels symbolically notable. The two Xaviers are seemingly beginning to get along. Another Xavier appears during the sequence, with a crystal face similar to that of the fortune teller. The two Xaviers touch tips with their shakshuris and play a duet together as the blowdown concludes. Symbolically, the blowdown can be interpreted as representing Xavier coming to terms with and forgiving himself, through the two separate Xaviers attempting to shake hands and the duetting at the end. Even if one is killed off, however, Xavier has fulfilled his promise to slay his father's killer. Regardless, some degree of closure has been achieved. The episode ends with the Cloudfather, now with 3 eyes, announcing who won the fight between the Xaviers, saying,
It was you!
to the audience. While this could be a literal meta-joke, like we, the audience, won, and the show is basically doing a mic drop, Xavier won the fight, and the Cloudfather is referring to us, so are we supposed to be Xavier? Is he also in the audience watching everything go down, witnessing this happen in third person? Is he the audience POV? The answer is unclear, but food for thought. At this point, with the first 10 episodes over, Xavier's first major story arc and season are now complete. Interpreted linearly as a cohesive plotline happening in chronological order. We know that his dad didn't care for him, whereas his mother remains to be seen but clearly somehow upset him. That he didn't have a great time at school, and that at some point he sought out spiritual wisdom, answers as to life's meaning. In doing so, he accidentally killed his father and sought out a spiritual teacher in the form of the shaman, who was of course somewhat abusive to him also. It is never clearly stated why exactly Xavier wants to study spirituality and why he goes to the shaman. Given that his father's death is caused because of Xavier seeking wisdom, and Xavier's powers come from his spirituality, this detail is kind of important, but notably, this question never comes up again throughout the show. Xavier never seeks out wisdom at any point in the series outside of flashbacks. His main objectives are consistently helping people and vengeance for the father. Those are the two main things he's pursuing. He spends years under the abusive tutelage of the shaman before leaving at the shaman's suggestion. We know this both from a scene in episode 2 and a different memory of him leaving shown in episode 17 of the next season. In both of them, the shaman is effectively trying to push him out the door. The shaman doesn't like being around him and is trying to get rid of him. It doesn't make the most sense for this to be two separate events, because that implies that he goes back to the shaman, and that's just kind of awkward in a storytelling sense. But the fact that the two are noticeably different does raise questions if they are effectively meant to be the same event. The main beats of the scene are still the same in both versions, so it could be Xavier misremembering, or it could be a retcon. If it is Xavier misremembering, though, that calls every other flashback into question, as if his memory is not good, any of them could be suspect. We know in the first episode Xavier abandoned a reality where he was actually somewhat accepted, seemingly due to his desire to ramble. Yet we know that rambling made him miserable. So either this was early on in his journey, the start of his character arc, before he understood how miserable rambling would make him, or he cares so much about his pursuit of answers that it takes priority over his own happiness. Notably not actual wisdom, but knowledge of his father's killer, the selfish desire to know specifically things relating to his backstory. One of the few reasons he has for destroying that universe that actually does make sense is to not be tempted by friendship, based on his breakup monologue right afterwards. We know in the second episode that Shiny sent him away and wanted to find him again, implying that he is Xavier's birth father. Yet the zoo scene raises a different possibility, which is consistent with the mother's characterization later in the series. Meanwhile, the father who raised him is described by Xavier as...
Needless to say, my so-called father was a scientist in some top-secret capacity I've yet to unveil. Yet.
in the very first episode. Whether accurate or not, Xavier saying so illustrates that he views his father's death as somehow connected to his origin, thus tying the search for his origins with his quest for justice. The mother's absence and what exactly she did is still unclear. He went from being a simple traveler in the first episode, in his own words, shunning the concept of powers, and selfishly, potentially destroying a universe for his own reasons, to successfully saving the Mexican gang and turning their lives around in the second. He talks explicitly about what makes a hero during the second episode's opening. Maybe that first experience left him somewhat conflicted, and he regretted deleting the girl from the first episode's reality. Maybe he's chasing the high of acceptance and popularity that comes with being a hero, instead of the suffering that rambling entails. After a lifetime of suffering, maybe he wants to be loved and cared for once. Something that he may have given up in that first episode. Episodes 3 and 4, in which he ruins the lives of both the Genius Kid and Octomom, reflect Xavier actively choosing to get involved in people's lives even if no one asks him for help. Unlike with the Mexican gang, the outcomes are genuinely horrible for everyone involved, and it's entirely on Xavier for taking the initiative to cause the conflict. Episode 5 continues this with the Witch Kid. Xavier again manages to find connection with another person before running away. Maybe it was cowardice, maybe it was his dedication to his quest for vengeance, but he ran away. His jealousy of the Genius Kid confirms that he is somewhat vain, wanting credit for his heroism, potentially more than he actually wants other people to be happy. He is selfish on some level. As of episode 6, his journey is clearly hurting him. His potential origins scare him. He might not even truly want the answers that he's actively seeking. Yet he has given up so very much in pursuit of it, maybe it's sunk cost fallacy. And every step of the way he hears that same sentence.
Listen, we don't cotton to freaks round these parts.
He is still actively hated by the people he comes across, same as he always has been. As of episode 7, the guilt from his failed heroism is getting to him. Xavier has been ruining lives trying to play hero every single episode so far, and the priest and orphan he killed imply that there have been even more misadventures off-screen. He wants to be a hero, he's completely open about that now, yet his heroism is still a sham. He doesn't even seek out those in need here. He actively ruins lives because of an advertisement he saw, and he doesn't even get much agency in fixing it. The farmer is the one who saves the day. He is utterly useless and utterly harmful here. Episode 8, his disdain for his mother is revealed but not explained. He doesn't even attempt heroism, he just tries to get his father's necklace back, and yet people still die. Maybe he realizes his father sucks, maybe not. Maybe he realizes the irony of his son burning everyone alive, and maybe not. No progress with his investigation is actually made, but he has potentially at least come to some terms with the abuse he suffered. Episode 9 is all introspection. The Path of the Mind shows off his failures as a hero and as a mentor while reminding him of the fire that killed his dad. Throughout the memories being relived, he only cares about the girl June and not at all about actually finding answers. The Path of the Heart shows him trying to accept love the way he always wanted, while his parents call him a monster and his so-called friends consume him. The affection he always wanted is denied to him, and in large part because of his actions. In episode 10, he confronts his past actions, the murder of his father. Two strangers, not knowing his story but seeing that he is indeed a kind of victim, leave him alone. He finds himself, sees himself from an outside perspective, and immediately hates himself. He possibly kills a part of himself, or learns to accept himself, but either way finds closure with the man who killed his father. Maybe now he's found peace on some level. With this interpretation, Xavier's character arc is tragic, understandable, satisfying, and yet in some ways still incomplete. Some open questions remain, although some answers can be inferred, but the primary theme of the show can be derived from just the storyline given. The question of what were his mistakes does yield a number of answers, though I won't discuss it just yet. Pause the video if you want to try and guess. The remainder of the series, though, isn't as pleasant as the first season. While the first half of the series has a clear set of thematic through lines that do manage to progress as the series goes on, the second season is significantly more disjointed with no permanent character growth actually happening within it. One of the series creators mentions during an interview that a third season was planned at some point, so the incomplete character arcs can be somewhat tied to that fact. Still, the lack of progress is a genuine criticism. Similarly, while the vast majority of the first season is consistently high quality, the second has several episodes which I would honestly just consider bad. Not to say it completely lacks quality, but that it is a downgrade. Before starting though, I should say that I won't be as linear for this section. The end of Xavier warrants some jumping around. The second season starts off with a scream.
A mantra is a soothing sonic reverberation through the throat, but it has no meaning, no significance. It's just the empty, gibritical sound of soul serenity, vibrations devoid of implicatorial importance. There's no issues. Don't look for meaning because there is none, okay? Meditation just calms me down.
Those internal thoughts actually drown out Xavier's inner monologue. He is aware of his parents' abuse, yet something feels different than before. His hatred of his mother, because
she knows what she's done,
is completely dropped as a plot point. Maybe his self-acceptance after the blowdown led to him no longer blaming her for the one-night stand at the zoo. His seeking the truth of his own origins is also dropped as a plot beat for this season, so maybe those two are connected. Given just how prominent the mom joke was in its episode, and how his origin hunt was across several episodes, it feels odd for both to be dropped and never again addressed, both for Xavier as a character and for the show as a whole. Similarly, he has never seemed to openly acknowledge either parent's lack of care for him before. The son confession was close, but it only addressed his failings, not that of the dad. The abandonment scene was also confirmed as a fake by Xavier himself. A recurring joke across the series is that Xavier is either blissfully unaware of or in complete denial regarding his parents' abuse, due to him not being the smartest. The joke continues far into this season, with Xavier overlooking obvious abuse until the very last episode. So the truth isn't clear. The opening dialogue and his actions give very conflicting impressions of his self-awareness. It's also worth mentioning it remains unclear exactly which Xavier we're following. Depending on the last season's interpretations, we have multiple copies available to choose from, and at least a few of them might not have gotten to experience the 10th episode, if episode 9's ending is to be taken seriously. For those other versions who didn't speak to the Cloud Father and didn't get closure regarding the father's death, there's an open question regarding what character development they have actually achieved. It's also possible that if multiple Xaviers exist, maybe not all of them, possibly explaining that discrepancy also. Going back to the episode, Xavier finds a priest escorting a child, and immediately accuses the priest of being a predator, just like his false accusation of the bullies in the first season. The episode soon reveals that the child is actually the predatory one physically abusing the priest. While not super relevant for the sake of the analysis, the concept of a predatory child does represent a noticeable tone shift for the series, going somewhat further in the direction of edgy humor. Finding a couple who are mourning their own lost child, Xavier gives them the predatory child as a replacement. The child begins to physically abuse them as well, only for them to medicate him into behaving. Also, applying blackface, Xavier declares the child,
"This is Shaka Dingo. He looks just like our Michael,"
so that the child might be more easily accepted into a non-white household. The next half of the episode deals with Xavier fighting against the commodification of spiritual chanting for the use of mass-market mental health medication. He convinces the monks to indulge in earthly pleasures, which lead to them using a machine to do the chanting for them instead, which Xavier then breaks, causing a body horror amalgamation of life to be generated. The amalgamation insults Xavier, telling him,
"I told you I'd make you vibe together."
Leave us alone, you freak!
You can't call me freak!
What are you gonna do? Tell your mommy?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm going to do.
To which Xavier then tries to, unburying her coffin and finding she isn't there. Pursuing her then becomes Xavier's primary motivation for the rest of the season. He also gets vaporized, notably. Besides the disconnected plotlines and themes of the first and second half of the episode, with the spiritual commodification and sexually abusive familial dynamics both being explored only on a surface level and with no real ties between them, Xavier's sudden attachment to his mom isn't explained. His willingness to unbury her corpse over an insult feels petty and weird enough to be almost out of character. His willingness to forgive her at all for whatever unknown action she did also feels unearned. His attempts at helping people here imply that Xavier's learned nothing after all the bloodshed and guilt from the first season, and with the show going in a generally darker direction with some of its jokes, I don't especially love this season. If Xavier did indeed find closure and self-acceptance after the Shakashuri blowdown, that may explain his sudden lack of guilt regarding his actions, and his no longer searching for his origins. At least on the origins point, however, his mother would know, and so his motivation list technically doesn't change much from the first season. The themes still mostly work. Xavier never got answers as to his origins, he is still desperate for connection and relationships, and it isn't clearly established whether he actually realizes that his mother doesn't love him. His actions can be read both ways, and he has deluded himself before. Helping people and finding his mother are his main motivations for the season, with what doth life still being blissfully absent as the actual answer he spends time searching for. The new flashbacks of Xavier's childhood throughout the season show his mother as toxic in much the same way that his father was. This only reinforces the idea that Xavier's childhood was tragic. It doesn't really change anything, though. Having found closure with the father's death, Xavier continued rambling, and is now pursuing someone who almost certainly doesn't want to see him. Only misery lies ahead if he goes with this course of action. Starting at this point, I'm going to be skipping around. Let's deal with the worst of the season first. In episode 12, Xavier, through his own stupidity, encourages a guy to take his own life. Taking a sandwich voucher off the man's corpse, Xavier goes to a restaurant and ends up saving the life of a mob boss while he's there. The rest of the episode focuses on Xavier protecting the mob boss until eventually realizing that he's helping the bad guy. An assassin, who spent his life tortured by the mob boss, is freed by Xavier and ultimately goes on to kill his creator. The episode mostly doesn't add anything, just Xavier attempting to help people and failing thanks to him being incompetent. We do, however, get a flashback of his mother getting a Heimlich session. Fitting in with what we know of his two separate dads and the zoo sequence, it paints a very specific image of someone who is very active romantically. Assuming the zoo sequence didn't happen, there isn't anything wrong with this, but doing so in front of a kid does speak volumes. Traveling forward a few more episodes, we get to episode 15. This one with Xavier trying to gather roadkill to offer a restaurant in return for use of their bathroom. The restaurant describes having extremely high quality meat through animals raised in-house and given extremely good treatment. Xavier ends up helping two homeless men infiltrate the restaurant as fake animals, due to the restaurant treating them better than society does, only for one of them to end up eaten as a result of this. The episode then turns to Xavier separating the surviving man from his aura, the aura breaking up with the man and becoming a prostitute, the aura spreading a spiritual STD across town, and Xavier then solving the crisis by getting the two back together before killing both of them. While the social commentary is notable, Xavier again ends up killing the people he's trying to help, without any character growth or guilt being shown alongside it. Skipping along a bit further, we get to episode 18. Xavier, still searching for his mother, finds a town mourning the loss of one of their residents. He ends up persuading them to go into massive amounts of debt, which they then pay for by pretending to be robots for Muslim tourists to gawk at and mistreat. They rise up against their Arabic oppressors, accidentally reanimate dinosaurs with the town lotion supply, and after killing the dinosaurs use their oil to build wealth for the town again. Xavier ends up time traveling out of the situation with no real character growth being accomplished. The town can be argued as perhaps better off, but it was yet another crisis caused by Xavier. No character growth achieved, pure filler. Those 3 episodes were lackluster in that nothing too interesting was shown regarding Xavier as a character, and very little of the overarching plot was in any way furthered. With that said though, going back. Episode 14, Xavier returns to his childhood home, now a strip club for pregnant women. Xavier enters, offends the bigots by his mere existence, and finds himself with a job, explicitly being hired to upset the bigots as it makes them act more kind towards one another. He relives various memories of his abusive childhood as he goes to the house, with the only interesting scene being him getting defensive over his dollhouse. Its presence in a large pink room implies it was intended for a girl, and given the parents' apparent hatred of Xavier, them giving him a dollhouse in a large room feels out of character. The room seems empty and not lived in. While the joke of Xavier playing with dolls feels straightforward, the characterization of his parents giving him anything raises a number of questions. If they had a large girl's room just laying around, did they have a daughter once? Did it come with the house? During an extended sequence, he goes back in time to teach his younger self by actively misremembering that he had done so. Not the first example of Xavier physically altering reality with his thoughts, but it's still notable as always. Canonicity is very suspect in the series. He gives his mother sugar pills instead of painkillers to help deal with her addiction for years on end, but her mind breaks at the realization she's been tricked for so long, she can never trust anything ever again. Aside from generally reinforcing the idea that his parents didn't love him, and the mildly more interesting implications of the dollhouse, not too much really happens in the episode. It's revealed that Xavier was abandoned for real once outside the country, seemingly on purpose, before finding his way back home. He didn't pick up on the mistreatment at the time, which again serves as a source of a joke. The most interesting moment in the episode is a brief flashback of Xavier's house burning.
Fire! Honey, get out of the house! Get out! Get out of the house!
These flames aren't real. Everything is just in my mind.
I scared the ghosts away.
The implications of this are rather complicated. It implies that the father did actually have enough time and awareness of the situation that he should have been able to escape, and it raises questions as to how exactly the mother managed to. Xavier's giving her sugar pills instead of painkillers directly ties into her not trusting the things in front of her, which by proxy means that her not trusting the fire as being real is directly because of Xavier. Symbolically, it's yet another example of Xavier hurting everything when he tries to help. Both the mother and father had a chance to escape, and it was Xavier's actions that ultimately caused the father to die. Furthermore, it raises even more questions on Xavier's end. Even if the fire was an accident, he seemingly didn't take the time to get the parents out or to warn them. He immediately ran outside, in spite of there being time for them to all escape. When portrayed as somewhat more instant, this isn't true, but the fire taking a minute to actually build up to that size does justify a much larger amount of guilt on Xavier's end. If the father died because he was trying to save the mother, then Xavier swapping out her pills would make him somewhat responsible. Before closing up on the episode, I don't want to go too much into the more breadtube style of analysis, but I do feel comfortable saying that the first season handled its more controversial and problematic subject matter in a much more generally tasteful manner, at least to me. The second season's handling of things like the mob boss, the aura, the Islamic community, and its gender-related discourse just generally don't work for me as well. I won't go into it because it's not relevant to the themes of the series, but it would feel wrong for me to not mention it here. Aside from the brief flashback of the parents during the fire, these 4 episodes don't really do anything to progress the series in terms of Xavier's general character arc and characterization. The next 2 episodes aren't perfect, but are far better and do stand with most of the first season. Going back a few episodes, let's talk episode 13. A feather puppet being is created, and the wind causes issue for Xavier. Xavier dedicates himself to fighting and undermining the wind, and so convinces a wind turbine worker that the wind can be controlled. The worker, a scientist, modifies the wind to be sentient and to work as his slaves. Meanwhile, Xavier gets inverted after grossing out Sneakhand. Encountering an emo goth artist, Dark Notion, who is deeply impressed with Xavier's inverted appearance, Xavier then spends the rest of the episode alternating between those 2 characters, desperately trying to win their affections and become closer and closer friends with each of them. These 2 objectives ultimately come into conflict, as Dark Notion wants to liberate the wind that Science Guy is enslaving. At various points, what appears to be the shaman manipulates Sneakhand into pleasuring him on the spot through snake charming. Nothing too interesting to analyze here, just the standard shaman abusive characterization that was introduced way earlier in the series. This characterization is mildly undermined, however, by the shaman being revealed as just being the feather puppet there at the end of the episode, meaning it changes nothing. The twin friendship dynamic, however, and Xavier's desperate attempts to befriend both of them while betraying the other does highlight Xavier as completely, legitimately, and sincerely wanting connection. While his first season characterization did seemingly feel guilt and lust, his genuine desire for friendship was, to an extent, always just subtext and never definitive. Empathy was implied and not stated. This episode changes that and confirms that Xavier does deep down want friendship. Which brings us forward a few episodes. Episode 17. A cryo-sleep station is found in the desert, where Xavier awakens the patients frozen there only to discover that they were frozen intentionally so that they might be healed by scientific advancements in the future. By doing so, he has effectively condemned them to death. The patients curse him for killing them with his failed attempt at being a hero, and Xavier decides to go normal in response. For the first time in the series, we see Xavier give up on helping people. Taking the face off one of the patients, Xavier then attempts a normal life for the episode, only to find himself exceptionally good at it, quickly rising to the top ranks of a corporation he works for. While his attempts at a family life with a recently single widow are genuinely awful, with the sexual jokes about him and her family all painting a far more toxic and abusive portrait of Xavier as a person than anything else in the series has, the episode does show him being able to achieve some degree of genuine happiness and acceptance, when his appearance and trying to help people are both taken out of the picture. His new life is ultimately ruined by the one surviving patient from the cryo chambers before the entire world is destroyed. Xavier vows to return to his rambling lifestyle by the end of it, which is portrayed as a form of self-acceptance in the episode. A throwaway line of dialogue about halfway through implies that his pauldron and life of helping people deeply mattered to him, and that he was sad to give it up. The commentary from the first season of him actively making the world worse isn't something he actively realizes, in spite of the whole cryosleep incident directly bringing it up to his face and calling attention to it. He seemingly quits it because he isn't getting the appreciation he thinks he deserves, but he does sincerely want to anyway. None of this is to undermine the utter betrayal of his character that is everything involving the Widow, which genuinely makes him an awful person worse than anything else in the series. But the rest of it gives a genuinely interesting exploration of his potential for a better future, one that he ultimately abandons. He was almost accepted and almost a better person, but was still clearly shown to be the monster that others perceive him to be, and his love for rambling, albeit subtly, is actually confirmed outright. And so, ignoring the Damnesia duo, only one episode remains, the resolution to Xavier's personal and season-long storyline. Resolution to Xavier's personal and season-long storyline. Episode 20, the last episode of Xavier, starts out with this line.
Mom spelled backwards is wow, and wow spelled backwards is woe is me that I can't seem to find my mom. But you don't see me crying about it. I won't cry. It's mind over mommy.
Calling back to the extremely introspective episode 9, Xavier converts the entire desert into an ocean. Given the mental revelations he experienced during that period, it's an interesting connection between the two episodes. Reaching a beach shortly after, Xavier torments a mascot and ends up sending him to an insane asylum, where Xavier searches for his lost mother. Admitted as a patient, his Rorschach test comes to life and is institutionalized in turn. He ultimately finds his mother's brain, and after implanting it in a separate patient, is told that she hated him and wanted to get away. He is soon approached by a nurse, but is tricked into committing incest due to her having the mother's body but a different brain. His sentient Rorschach test kills the doctor who tricked Xavier, with Xavier's standard stupidity resulting in many people's deaths outside the asylum. This sequence ends with Xavier, the mother, and his mother's body all three giving birth simultaneously on a beach before the actual conclusion scene of the show. Having just given birth, Xavier snaps out of it within a room with a therapist. With a mirror in hand, the doctor says he will show Xavier his true self as he actually is. A live-action blonde man is shown as Xavier's reflection. Xavier then says to the doctor,
Hot dang, I'm cured.
Cured? Who said there was anything wrong with you?
This final scene, and particularly that final line, work on three separate levels. The first level is obviously as a joke. Anyone who watches the series can easily come up with a very, very long list of things that are obviously wrong with Xavier, so the rhetorical "who said there was anything wrong with you" is absurd from the premise. The second, contradictory level, however, is that the premise isn't actually wrong. Xavier isn't a bad person for wanting love and empathy to make the world a better place, and he has been through so much trauma that him wanting answers as to why he's been through it is fully justified. It is very likely that he searched for spiritual wisdom to try and get answers as to the abuse he's been through. The search did ultimately cost him his father's life and years of abuse by the shaman. His pursuit of closure and understanding did ultimately cost him various chances of actual happiness, and his quest for closure did lead to incest with his mother. But he still isn't wrong for wanting closure. He made bad decisions, but for understandable reasons. I've danced around it a bit, but given his childhood was so miserable, his original pursuit of spirituality may have sprung from that fact. He may have wanted to understand why he suffered so much, what the point of the suffering actually is. To counter that, though, he is never shown truly searching for wisdom. It's the one thing his character never seems to actually want at any point in the series. His journey to find his father's killer, and his journey to discover his origin, and his journey to discover what doth life, can all be interpreted as variations of him wanting closure, some sort of justification for the pain he's been through, and a way to move on from it. And with this interpretation, considering how much rambling causes him to suffer, his character is deeply tragic, abandoning happiness and acceptance in pursuit of something he never finds. Xavier is told clearly by his mom that she was trying to get away from him, something he didn't seem to have realized. Her abuse made the fact that she didn't like him obvious, and subtle hints are given that he might have realized that deep down. But in spite of everything, he never openly acknowledged it, and his decision to pursue her, either denial, out of ignorance, it resulted in him committing incest. His refusal to let go and his search for closure led to even more trauma. After the first season, he seemingly accepted himself, to an extent, coming to terms with his role in killing his father. yet he never truly came to terms with his crimes as a failed hero. I've ranted about Season 2 enough at this point, but the pursuit of closure in the first season with the dad is really the same thing. He's sacrificing happiness to try and get closure. The Dark Notion and Going Normal episodes both show he does have potential to get a happy ending, but he doesn't take it. The filler episodes of 12, 15, and 18 all show Xavier continuing the attempts to help people, hurting them in the process. He hasn't learned anything after the first season, and if anything has regressed, becoming a worse person. The entire season only leaves them worse off than where he started. If his main motivation is just that, pursuit of closure and explanation for his trauma, then he has repeatedly failed and stumbled and nothing has progressed. If what he actually wants is love and affection, he is his own worst enemy. But it must be stated, 2 episodes remain, and one more interpretation exists for that last scene. There's more to Xavier still, and the last of it isn't quite so simple. For now, we move on to the Damnesia duo, a combination of the words damn, as in condemned to a hell you can't escape from, and amnesia, a state of not remembering. Damnesia Vu Part 1.
This is an AI trained on the narration from the rest of this video. I, the creator of this video, cannot be fucked with another audio recording session due to a wonderful mix of performance issues vocally, general breathing issues due to perpetually poor cardio, and just a universal tendency to, as the kids say, suck. There should be a 20-minute analysis of the Damnesia episodes, going through scene by scene and breaking down each detail symbolically the way I did episode 9 of the first season. It's by far the most dense part of the series, thematically, and so is absolutely worthy of such treatment. But the copyright deities have decided that Damnesia and Damnesia alone is an affront to their standards. All else in the video was acceptable, except to them. So here is a greatly condensed recap instead, just covering the big points of this analysis. So to start out, Xavier wakes up in a checkerboard room, surrounded by doorways. Passing through the door, he is teleported into a new location, and oftentimes a new reality. One segment is 2D animation, another is seemingly live action. Each segment ends with Xavier either getting injured or killed and reappearing within the room. The only exceptions to this are the girl segment, which I will be coming back to later, and the barcode face dream, both of which have someone else dying as the reset trigger, and one of which reveals Xavier himself to be the other person who died. Due to Xavier starting and ending the episode by falling asleep and waking up within the checkerboard room, and due to the resets being connected to injury or death, just like what causes people to wake up from dreams in real life, and also thanks to these being the only 2 episodes in the series to not start out within the desert, I think it's reasonable to view them as being effectively dream episodes, all taking place within Xavier's head. Because of this, I will be analyzing them the same way I did episode 9 of the first season, as a non-canon experience in terms of reality, but strongly canon in terms of Xavier's mindscape and psyche as being completely symbolic. With this interpretation, the first Amnesia doesn't actually say too much interesting, excluding the specific contributions of the girl dream. I will show a brief synopsis of the other dreams on screen real quick before getting into it. The girl dream has Xavier take the form of a blonde girl, and starts out in the pink room from the strip club episode. He tells his quote-quote mummy, who doesn't look like his real mom, that he doesn't want the dollhouse that he was previously defensive of, that he instead wants to ramble the world, helping people along the way. He then finds a gay man within the desert who wants to go to heaven, smuggles him into heaven via the Pope, and then the gay man dies, sending Xavier back to the room. The pink room itself, the mom who looks unlike his real mom, the weird aristocracy symbolism that I will describe on screen, and the girl form for Xavier are all topics I rant about at length in the original video, but won't bother with too much now. Suffice to say, I don't fully get those bits, and would argue that they aren't important anyways. Here's what does matter. Basically, Pink Room makes no sense for Xavier to have, and is clearly important as the only location from the main series to actually show up in the Damnesia dreamscape, other than the desert for a brief cameo in both the girl and mum dream. The idea of Xavier wanting to ramble as a child means that his desire to help people predates his desire to study spirituality, and thus also predating his father's death and the full journey that followed. I will throw up on screen the implications of this on his backstory. It paints a very, very different character for Xavier than the closure interpretation I laid out earlier. Those details aside, nothing else too important is gleaned from the first amnesia. The second, however, is more generally fascinating. ... The starting skit of the episode is a dog eating ketchup, with text on screen explaining that the episode is fan-made, a collection of skits sent into the studio that then got edited together. For authorial intent-related reasons, you could discount the whole episode because of this. The dog scene is directly followed by Xavier waking up in the checkerboard room. So again, even if canon, it's symbolic and non-literal, just like the previous part. We have a lot of character work for Xavier, some interesting portrayals of him as a horror monster, some sorrowful portrayal of him as an elementary student wishing for a better home life, but the big parts are towards the end of the episode. We get Xavier asking the shaman why, only to be told off for doing so. He is rebuked for seeking knowledge, told off for the one thing that he went to the shaman for. He is called out for wanting wisdom for the first time. And, most importantly, we get the song.
Zero clue if I'm actually going to be able to play it in full or how I'm going to handle this bit, so I guess surprise myself later. The song describes how much he suffers in his search for meaning, and how he isn't really sure what he's even looking for. How Xavier won't know if his life has been wasted at the end of it. The catch-up line is a little interesting, possibly referring to the dog skit, and possibly being a variant of the words catch up, to do what people do when they regain an understanding of each other's life. So each sunset comes with greater understanding, yet the next day comes with even more questions. More than most of the show, I think the song does an excellent job of reiterating the idea that Xavier is suffering because of his journey, and that he doesn't understand what the point of all his suffering is. He's miserable and he doesn't understand why. Which leads us to the final resolution. While the first season does act as a cohesive arc for Xavier as a character, it leaves him incomplete in terms of his general character development. The second season, at times, repeatedly betrays the character of Xavier's first season, at times reiterates his flaws without showing any progress, and at times introduces interesting concepts on top of it, but without any noticeable character growth alongside it. Which brings us to the final analysis. My shortcut to deriving themes from media is to ask the simple question, where did the characters go wrong? What decisions did the character make that led to unnecessary suffering, and what lesson can we, the audience, take from those to avoid making the same mistakes in our own life? For Xavier, there are two of them, and they are fittingly contradictory to each other. The first we've already talked about. Xavier genuinely wants the affection and support of his friends, family, and a loving partner after a lifetime of suffering. His decision to try and find closure and answers for the suffering he's been through, and his rambling in pursuit of that, both actively ruin the few genuine connections he ends up making. From this lens, he should give up and try to somehow settle down. His heroism genuinely does more harm than good anyway. He is capable of happiness after all, we've seen it on multiple occasions. The second interpretation, however, goes against this. We know from Damnesia that, quite literally, his childhood dream was to ramble and help people, and we know from Going Normal that he does, even now, still want to. Even if it's mostly just wanting attention, his desire to help people is at least a little bit genuine. If this is true, and what he wants deep down is to travel around helping people, then the mistakes made throughout the series because of his stupidity and hubris are the main antagonist he needs to conquer. The answer to how to avoid his mistake is to study, to be critical but open-minded, to make sure that he and you genuinely understand a situation before taking the time to intervene. To seek out genuine knowledge and wisdom, actual character growth, something that he never, at any point, actually attempts in the show. And therein lies the conflict. His quest for acceptance and connection is undermined by his search for closure and answers, by his abandoning what little stability he finds. Yet his attempts to help people require him to ramble on in search of answers as well. There are ways for him to balance these out. Closure and wisdom are two different things after all, but with his character arc seemingly unfinished, the balance he seeks remains unclear. Yet he does still seem aware of this and everything else, more literally than one might think. Returning to that final scene in the psychologist's office, the obvious interpretation of Xavier's real self being shown is that his fake self, the Xavier we've seen throughout the series, isn't real. that his perception of the world around him is in some way incorrect, that he is seeing things, almost like it's some sort of hallucination or a dream, just like in Damnesia, where his real bedroom was seen. If this is true, and everything we see throughout the series is all in Xavier's head, then what can we assume about the real Xavier? He likely suffered an abusive childhood, he probably pursued spiritualism as a career path and life goal, and was likely abused by his mentor figure as well. There's a good chance he caused great harm to other people in his attempts to help them, due to ignorance on his end. He almost certainly experienced some form of abuse from strangers, though his real appearance doesn't seem like it would cause him to be labeled a freak the way he is in the show. What's more interesting is his self-perception and his general circumstances. Each episode starts in a desert, where survival is a challenge and Xavier finds himself isolated. Xavier's appearance is that of an animal more than a person. The personality full of hubris, the constant misunderstandings of situations created in his own mind, it paints a self-image of a real Xavier as exactly the caricature we've seen throughout the series. It's almost like Xavier's perspective of the series is the same as ours, that Xavier is the camera and audience. Who exactly won the Shakashuri Blowdown again?
It was you!
What's funny about this interpretation is that, unlike most coma theories, it doesn't actually change much. The idea that Xavier's mind and subconscious literally reshape the world around him was introduced extremely early in the series, and semi-canon events involving his entire plan or reality have been around just as long. Its biggest revelation is that all of the awkward and embarrassing scenes we see of Xavier are quite literally how he views himself as well, meaning deep down he's aware of most every personal failing I have brought up so far. It's rather optimistic in that whatever abuse or trauma he suffered that led to those concepts pervading his mind, he does now know the dangers of seeking out closure from toxic people, and he has had a chance to grapple with his trauma and to grow as a person in real life. He sees the same train wreck that we the audience do, and by proxy, acknowledging the problem is the first step. He finally achieves self-awareness, and at least somewhat has a chance at a happy ending off-screen. Yet, anything else is suddenly made arbitrary. The characters he killed, the small contradictions, the mystery of his animalistic appearance, his powers, all of it becomes pointless. The small inconsistencies are to be expected. Dreams frequently break realism, after all. Nothing else can be known for certain, so not much else can be taken away from the show. The show was meant as a comedy on Adult Swim, satirizing New Age spiritualism, a movement which obsessed over finding meaning. It's fitting then that the final takeaway is something Xavier realized early on.
And that's when he realized that to stand and consider all possibilities is to drown in a tunneling sea of infinite potentiality.
It's best to not get caught up in the search for closure with this series. Just follow your heart and enjoy the ride, don't think too hard. If the meta takeaway of To the Moon is the importance of escapism, even if there is no meaning beyond that, the meta takeaway of Xavier is to not get too caught up in searching for meaning and explanation. Closure is overrated, just have fun, live in the present. Relish in the absurdity, and don't think about it past that. And that's the vid. The script may warrant another editing session, my voice work sucks because I'm sick, and I suck, but I'm going to hate my voice anyway, and I've been working on this for far too long, so might as well get this out there and get used to the self-induced cringe that comes with it. If you watch this, whoever you may or may not be, and have literally any thoughts of input at all, please say so. This is the first of hopefully many projects, so any advice I'd be genuinely grateful for. Thanks for watching.